I was in City Hall in New York City, and the horrible news came that a family had died in a fire in an illegally converted building. Too many units in the building illegally converted. And I could feel what was going to happen, and just a few moments in the Post and the Daily News would call and say, "Had you ever received a complaint about that building before?" So I called the buildings department, and the commissioner said, "Well, sure, we've got a complaint, but we have 50,000 complaints a year." I called the fire department and said, "Do you ever had a complaint?" And they said, "Sure, but we have 30,000 complaints a year." That may have the numbers backwards. And, we're working through the backlogs, and we've been out there once before, and we're doing our best. So there's this group in the back. Many of you know the guy's name, Mike Flowers, in the back of City Hall. I don't know, but he must have had some NSA background to him, because he looked very murky in the corners and just said, "Give me 60 days and I'll come back to you." And so, over 60 days he got mortgage foreclosure information, tax delinquency information, 911 runs, 311 runs, and a couple other data sets, easily acquired data sets, and said, "I can improve by 1,000% the predictability of which of those 50,000 buildings is actually going to burn down." Right? So now we're down to 300 to 500 buildings. We put a building team and a fire department team together, and we go out and remediate the buildings. Right? So the point of this slide is the definition of responsiveness is not just how quickly we get to a problem that's been reported, but how we preempt the problem in the first place. And a new definition of responsiveness can be data-driven. The same is true, obviously. I know that you had some presentations from Philadelphia yesterday. Another way to think about responsiveness is how are we returning the investment to the taxpayers, and how would one return the investment to the taxpayers in a new world of responsiveness? It's by concentrating on the outliers, right? Government is very good about making the same widget every day, regardless of whether person one needs 2 widgets and person 2 needs no widgets. Now, this is just an example about Philadelphia and state of Pennsylvania parole and probation, where there's a calibration of which offenders need this sort of attention, which offenders don't need very much attention, which parole officer is good with which type of offender. So the idea of a responsive government, an innovatively driven one, is one that looks at outliers and manages resources to match the outliers with a much better return on investment. Now, as we think about this, though, and this is what you all live every day, and this is a very exciting meeting. Just the size and intensity and passion around this subject. Many of the people that are not in the room, right, are frustrated, right? My students at Harvard Kennedy School, many of them don't want to go into government because they want to help their communities, right? Now that seems inconsistent, but really what they're saying is, I want to go out and use all my discretion and all my initiative, and I want to go solve a problem. I don't want to be locked in a hierarchy. And we're here today thinking about the role of innovation delivery teams and the like in order to kind of bust up some of those hierarchies. But our cities are organized like this, right? We've got hierarchical ceilings, control and command mechanisms. We've got vertical barriers between the agencies, right? We have often overlapping rules and consent judgments and the like. We have openings from open data that kind of penetrate that. But how can our employees become empowered in a way that really allows them to make decisions using the data that's available to them? And part of the conference and part of the very excitement of the Louisville story in and of itself is how public employees can become empowered with the message and championship of their leadership to do a better job. And the way I think about this is that up until today, there has been this kind of tension across local government in the U.S. between accountability and discretion. We have to have it one way or we have to have it the other way. But digital tools allow us to look at government performance. They let us look at insight. They allow us managers manage their employees in a much more effective way. And we don't have to have the trade-offs in terms of this issue. When I was in New York, I used to go and do these community meetings 6 times a week, because I was from Indiana. I was trying to learn New York, right? So I'd go to the outer boroughs and I'd have these 6 meetings, 6:30, 7:30, and 8:30 on Thursday and Friday mornings, and we'd get citizens around and they would talk about their issues and talk about ways government could be better. And then over time, 3 weeks in a row, I heard small restaurateurs complain that they got really expensive tickets from the health department because their cheese was the wrong temperature, right? So if cheese was 42 degrees instead of 40 degrees, or 44 instead of 38, and something that seemed relatively minor. And so I went back to the health commissioner and said, can't we give the inspector some discretion, because the temperature of the cheese is the temperature of the cheese when it's in the refrigerator, but often the cheese is out of the refrigerator when they cook with it, right? So I remember what the health commissioner said, which is, do you really want to introduce discretion on the part of inspectors? Because how are you going to manage the exercise of that discretion? Because some of the discretion could be abused, some might even be corrupted, right? Well, then you say, okay, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense in the world in which we live today, where we have a mobile tool, a tablet, or a smartphone, right? We know how long the inspector has been in that particular restaurant. We know when they exercise their discretion not to write a ticket. We know who the outliers are in the greatest number of tickets, or the fewest number of tickets, right? All that information as a manager is instantaneously available, and so the tension between accountability and flexibility and discretion is no longer quite so sharp. These are just examples. Department of Transportation Idea Hub, using a kind of digital information boxes, if you will, to kind of penetrate the hierarchical barriers, give us your best idea. The discretion that many of you know, of course, the Boston app that's available to city workers, but the fact that the city workers now have the discretion to fill a pothole on the way to a different pothole, or to solve a problem because they can see the data on their tablets or smartphones, has driven the responsiveness down in terms of days or hours in very dramatic ways, because the workers have discretion to manage their decision. Now, this is a messier slide, but I do want to spend just a second with it. So I've been involved more or less in the area of child welfare for most of my decades, and it's a really difficult job, right? It's a very difficult job for a young caseworker to go into a tough home and decide whether to remove the child. I mean, you can't think of very many jobs that are quite so challenging. And over the years, these caseworkers go in with their clipboards full of pieces of paper and very narrow views of of the information they can get. And then more recently, right, for example, in Indiana, which is a leader in this, all that information is now, of course, digitized on the tablet. But that still doesn't seem like a really sufficient answer, because what we need is, and the purpose of this slide is that some of the information, anytime we're trying to solve a systemic problem, we need information from the system itself, right? So there's information about previous cases, or information from the school. Was the child truant or tardy or absent? What do the police records say? What do the medical records say? What do other counselors say, right? How does that information get to the caseworker? But most importantly, how do we use decision support tools to suggest to that caseworker that if this child has a broken arm and her sibling has a broken arm, then here are the following 3 questions you should ask, based on kind of mining the data and giving suggestions about how one can advance their discretion. So I think that the world of the empowered and energetic field worker in government is right around the corner in a very exciting way. And we're all in government, right, because we want to solve problems for people in our community. So doing less commodity work and more value-added work, and using our discretion with the right information, is going to unlock a lot of responsiveness inside government. Now, just the last point. So how do citizens cooperate in the production of government, right? What is the responsive citizen, and how does that work with us? How do we use data, visualize data well? How do we use the open data platforms? How do we make data useful to citizens? And the like, all are part of not just how we empower citizens, but how we empower them to participate with us in the innovation and the co-production of these solutions. And just a couple comments. In the early days of open data, the definition of open data was go get your really ugly PDF documents and put them up in a way that very few people could actually use. The world of open data today is a data of excellent visualization. It's I think I have too many Philadelphia stories here. There are never too many Philadelphia stories, right? All right. You heard the Philadelphia story yesterday, I guess, and today as well. But just, Philadelphia also has a whole panoply of the tools similar to Louisville, but just kind of how one gamifies the engagement itself. Many of you are looking at kind of participatory budgeting. It's the definition of responsive government, which is, this is from a New York example where some of the city councilors who have local social service dollars ask for people in their community to participate in actually voting on how those dollars should be utilized. This is kind of the co-production and co-decision making in terms of citizen and employee engagement. The other thing that I think is particularly interesting as we move on here, right, is what is the role of government in the production of data that helps the residents participate? So this is New York City 311, biggest in the country, 20 million calls a year. But we run these 311 systems, and I was involved years ago in kind of putting one together in Indianapolis. The more I thought about what I'd done, is I had made it easier for people to complain to the city, which is good, but that's not really the definition of a wholesome relationship with your community, right? So if we think about the future of these systems in New York City, Chicago, and Philadelphia, Pittsburgh and others are working on this today. It's kind of what is the role of 311 as a platform for community engagement, right? Digital tools, mobile tools, people seeing that other people in their neighborhood have made a complaint about the same issue. So how do we think about that? And this is just an example of if we really want to be engaged in innovation, right, then we will engage our communities with well-visualized tools. This is a map of New York City 311 a couple years ago. The size of the yellow dot represents the number of complaints at that particular intersection, but more importantly, New York City then educated its community board chairs on how to use the software to identify which complaints are in that yellow circle and why are there 3 different types of complaints on that street. And what happened is the operating agencies were fearful this would lead to kind of an avalanche of new complaints. But people already knew how to complain. What this allowed them to do is find solutions, right? I remember one of these meetings where the community board leader said, the reason you got all these dots on this intersection is because you have a senior citizen's home on one side of the street and you have a pharmacy on the other, and the Department of Transportation will not change the walk-wait signs to give enough time for people to get across the street, right? So basically what we had in that situation is somebody living in the neighborhood who could see a solution, because government officials work in verticals and people live horizontally, right? So an answer to a transportation problem may not be in the transportation department, it may be in the public works department or the like. So the visualization of the data and the participation of the community is exciting as well, and some of that data obviously comes from sensors such as those are being used in Louisville and Chicago and the like. If one talks about responsive government, I think at least it's worth calling out this terrific effort by the last mayor of D.C., Mayor Gray, asking people to tweet in their experiences with government agencies and then grading those. And just for purposes of kind of rounding out the 2 days you've had here, right, the reason this slide works, the reason this program works, is not just because the mayor created a campaign for people to digitally express their experiences with city workers. It's because he put it in his report card and used it as part of his management, right? And those B's and B minuses were C's and D's when he started. So it's the collection of the information, the operationalization of the information, and the attention of the elected official that really makes a difference. These are the Boston apps as well. So just kind of in closing, sometimes a neighborhood intermediary like the Smart Chicago intermediary is helpful as well. And you need a systemic data to respond to a systemic problem. This is an example of New York City's approach to homelessness, where the issue of homelessness is often, is it drugs, or is it alcohol help, or is it domestic violence, or is it just the lack of housing or what the case may be, and gathering that data allows one to prevent homelessness, and obviously that answer may reside in multiple areas. And then the reason we're here today, right, is because you all work for innovative leaders. They set a standard that gives you the discretion in which to operate, and particularly in a situation where information is in these verticals, and some of it's in the community, and some of it's in the state government, somebody has to kind of lead the effort that says we are going to create an innovation delivery team, we are going to create a data analytics center, we are going to look at how we're going to share data and identify problems as well, and whether those are the new offices of urban mechanics, offices of innovation delivery teams, or the like, they provide the cover and the support for people to produce the solutions that they wish. So performance management, what you do plays a part in that. Obviously, measuring performance unlocks innovative solutions. Measuring performance allows for us to be more responsive as well. These are just other examples. So let me just step back and close by the following. You know, I've been a county district attorney and a mayor and a deputy mayor and a great fan of those of you who are still in local government. And we see frustrations day to day, right? Because the demand for public services exceeds the willingness of our citizens to pay for the services they demand, right? They're just out of balance, and and it's not a temporary recessionary matter, it's just a permanent imbalance. It's the human nature. So we say, well, that's pretty challenging, but the exciting thing is that there is more commitment today to innovation across the country in local government than any time, I bet, in a century. There are more tools that allow us to address that. There are more processes in terms of performance teams and the like that are committed to it. And if we think about this creatively, massive amounts of data that can allow us to be responsive in new ways, that can allow us to engage our communities in new ways and liberate our employees to do what they're best at, which is service, we can really set a new standard for local government across the country. And I appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you very much.